Hey everybody, I'm TJ Van Tol. I work as a developer advocate at Progress. Welcome to React Wednesdays. I've got Dan Wilson with me. Dan, how you doing?
Hey, I'm Dan Wilson. I work at Blues Wireless, where we simplify connecting IoT things to the cellular network. I also help organize the Enterprise React newsletter. So if that's your kind of thing, Google it. That's how we found out about our guest today.
All right. Well, if you're new here, this is React Wednesdays. This is a weekly stream. We do it on Twitch. We invite cool and interesting people from around the React world, have us teach us something new and interesting. So again, we do this every week. If you go to telerik.com/React Wednesdays, which I'll go ahead and toss in the chat here, you can get links. You can throw this on your calendar. You can either throw the whole thing if you want to subscribe to it or individual episodes. Next week, we've got a little bit of a change in pace. We're doing a release of Kendo React, which is the product, the thing I help work on, which I've come branded here today. So if you want to learn more about Kendo React, we're going to be talking about that next week. And coming up on the horizon, we've also got React Wednesdays all-day edition. So if you enjoy the format of these streams, we're going to be doing, Dan and I are going to drink a whole bunch of coffee. We're going to invite a ton of people in, and we're going to do this for the greater part of a day. So that should be a fun day. So check that out. There's actually also here, there's a sign up button on the top here. It's totally free event, but if you want to get reminders, calendar invites, that sort of thing, there's a button you can click to sign that up. So
TJ, let's get one more look at that fancy t-shirt.
Oh, the shirt? Yeah.
Yeah. Do I see the chicken on there?
No chicken. So the chicken's the mascot of Code It Live, like the Twitch thing. It's not part of the. So you got to get into the canon, right? There's the chicken universe versus the Kendo universe. We like merge it here, but
I see. We're the merge point. That makes sense.
I don't know. The chicken might make its way over. It's become quite a hit. I'll have to bring up. We had a separate stream where we created zombie chickens, which is kind of fun. So we might have to introduce them, or like have a Halloween version of the site, Halloween stream. Something like that.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Let's see, I need a segue here and see. Then if we need to debug those zombie chickens, we're going to be talking about debugging React and React components today. And for that, I want to press a button here, Joe Morgan to the stream. Joe, how's it going?
Hey, everyone. Doing pretty good. Thanks for having
me. You want to tell people who you are, what you do, that sort of thing?
Sure. Name is Joe Morgan. I'm a developer. Work all over the place. The kind of what this demo is based off on is some articles I wrote for DigitalOcean. Wrote a series about how to use React. So it starts all the way from not knowing anything to deploying an application in the DigitalOcean space, but really just to any sort of Linux server.
Very cool. And so I think you're going to show some of that off today, right? Just the debug tools and debugging in general.
Yep. Go ahead. Let me go ahead and pull it up. And I'll talk about why I think this is important, which is when I was talking to an editor about this. So can you see my screen?
Yeah,
absolutely.
All right, cool. So when I was talking to my editor about this, we kind of came up with a list of topics that we want to cover, state management and components and props and all that stuff. And I said, one of the things that I want to make sure we get in really early is using debugging tools, because it's so frustrating when you're beginning something and you don't know how to debug it. It's really difficult. And so I like to put that as early as I can, because that's really how we work. That's how development works. You don't just have this genius idea and you code it all up and everything's good. It's kind of a back and forth. There's problems. Things break in the middle. And the more you can kind of figure that out, the better.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, and it's funny too, because I've been doing React for a decent amount of time now, and even I sometimes forget that these tools are here, right? Like I go back to like my tried and true like console.logging something before my brain clicks in and goes like, wait a minute, what am I doing here? Like I could just view a live view of this, and I like every time I go in here, I know there's stuff that I don't even understand the depth of what's in here. So I'm sort of excited to see you go through this.
Yeah, beyond console.log, I think we can all sort of empathize with the experience of banging on the keyboard for an hour and trying to test it. And it's like, it works. And then there's this weird sort of feeling like you're like, it can't really work. Like what's gonna break here?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's a common experience because React is very, very well documented. That's one of the best things about it. But the developer tools are just not as well documented, even among, kind of the greater documentation universe of tutorials and things like that. Because kind of this idea came from me when I was trying to figure out how to profile something. And after a lot of search, I found exactly one article that was getting so it's a great tool. Like, we all eventually reach a point where we have to profile something, but it doesn't really make sense until you kind of dig in and see what's all there.
Yeah, and actually, another thing that comes to mind is we have people on this stream, like we've been doing this for about a year at this point, that sometimes they run into problems when they live code something, and it's amazing how few people actually reach for the React dev tools to solve these problems, right? Instead, you're just staring at your editor for a while, even amongst people that are kind of more like seasoned React people. So it's just kind of funny to me.
Now that you say that, TJ, I do remember that. And like, one would think that, you dip right into the most specialist tool possible to get the most specialist help possible. And I think today Joe's going to show us why all that needs to change. And this should be the first thing people reach for.
Yeah. Cool. Well, I'll tell you what, I'll start to go into the example, and I think that'll kind of illuminate part of why we still reach for console.log. In full disclosure, I do too. I think it's so ingrained in us, especially people who have been developing for a long time, who have switched frameworks multiple times. Like, you kind of get used to doing stuff cross frameworks, even if it's like console.log. So let me show off the application that we're going to talk about. So this is a really simple application that what it does is you take some text and you put the text in this text box, and it creates some information about the text. Let me put something it's a little more readable. So hello world, and we all have that one. You can see that it has the character count, so how many characters there are, the word count, and then the character map. And this is essentially, it takes the characters, does a little count by each character, and then orders them. And in addition to that, you have these 3 buttons that kind of toggle on and off each of the parts. So nice. Nothing spectacular, but you can probably already see, like, this is going to be a pretty heavy operation. So first thing I do before I even go into the code is I think one of the big, like, if you've hung on to this point, one of the best pieces of advice I can give you is right now, which is make liberal use of the filters. Because when you pop into a production application, this thing is going to be massive, just absolutely huge. And this is a tiny little application, but you can see with all the third-party stuff, I'm using React Router, obviously. It has a whole bunch of stuff in there, and it can make it really hard to kind of figure out what you're doing. And you can kind of find text, a little finder thing, and that's great. But I think the first thing you can do is just kind of get rid of a bunch of that stuff. So here's this little toggle button. And one of the things you can do is if you click on components, you can start to add filters in there. And so the easiest filter I found is just the name. It's a regular expression. I'm not going to do anything super smart. I'm just going to put the name of the component followed by a pipe. I'll just do a couple real fast just so you can see how it looks. So link, router, I see a switch in there, and route. Because to be quite honest, unless you're really getting in deep, debugging a third-party library, you don't really need to see that stuff. You're mostly going to be concerned with your own components.
Wow, look at that.
Yeah, so already you can start to navigate. You're like, okay, these look familiar because I know what these things are. I'm going to go ahead and add in the debug there because the debug is part of. Actually, no, that's one of mine too. We'll leave that out. So then
do those filters persist?
Yep. In fact, time I do this, I have to remember to go and get rid of them, or else they're there now.
Where's my component?
Yeah, so they will persist, and I believe they persist across applications. So if you have a couple that you're working on and you're missing something you're thinking about, be sure to check that.
Well, those in the audience that have regex anxiety will know that's just really a pipe delimited list that lets you exclude things, so it doesn't have to have that regex fear that many people do. And just in a handful of characters here, you've turned this tree into a very usable, concise view of the application. And I agree with you. That should be the very, very first step. Get rid of the cruft so you can pay attention to what's important.
Exactly. Simplify. Cut it all out. All right. So I'm going to pop into the code real fast just so I can give you a quick look at the structure. So everything here, what's happened is we have the application, and we're just using a simple state and a context to provide the information on down. So one thing to note is that you can add a display name to their context. So this was, display name was popular a lot when higher order components were there. And that's something I would suggest you do. Otherwise, it's just going to have this generic context provider. Not very helpful. Unfortunately, the other hooks don't take the display name as well. I think you can add a display name to it, but I remember looking up once and they suggested against that because it can really cause some performance problems, whereas this isn't a big performance problem. So that's that. And then the smaller components are pretty much just, you pull out the context. If you're not supposed to show them, show null. Otherwise, do something like the text length. Now, the one that's a little more beefy is this character map. So a character map takes the text, which is this text here, and it passes it to this itemized function. What that does is split across the letters, filter out the spaces, pretty much goes through and iterates and adds one for each time the letter comes up, and then it sorts them all. So this is designed to be intentionally poor performing. You know, you can see it loops through 1, 2, 3, and then a sort, who knows how many there. So this, for kind of the demo purposes, think of this as a black box. Like, this is something that you can't change. Maybe it's an API, maybe it's just never going to change. You know, what can we do with the dev tools to start to figure out how to work with those things that we can change? So that's a quick little overview. And again, you can see them all here. All right, so next, we're going to kind of go in and start to dive into the components. Let's look at the provider here. You can see the value on the side here. You can manipulate the value directly, so we can add some exclamation points there. And this is a little odd because it looks like the text popped out of there, but it still showed up. There we go. It still showed up in the context, so I must have erased that somehow. So since the text updates the context and they're not double linked, they don't have that two-way binding, then that's not going to update. But if you scroll down, you can see it does, because if you add to it, add another word in there, it's going to update the word. Which I have to click off. There we go. Updates the word right there. Cool. All right, so down here, you can see that the hook has a reducer. Again, it doesn't have a nice name. So if you have components that have a lot of hooks in them, it can get a little messy. You just kind of have to remember what goes with which is kind of unfortunate. But you can manipulate the hook directly, which is pretty nice. So since this is a reducer, we can turn things on and off here directly. And then, of course, if you have props that are not Booleans, that are things like strings or numbers, you can change those. So this is a prop that is only on one component, but it's the color, so we can patch red there. You know what? Honestly, I don't use these a ton. These are mostly there kind of, I use them more as a reading thing to see what happens, what kind of state they believe they have. But it is kind of nice if you ever just want to, just kind of want to quickly play with a few ideas without having to go back and click through a bunch of UI elements. That's kind of a nice thing.
I love that quote. I wish I could pull quote that. That's what every senior engineer knows how to say is what state it believes it has.
Yes.
Well,
yes.
I think too with third-party stuff, sometimes that's useful because like if it's your own thing in a simple app, you probably know what's there. But sometimes if it's a third-party thing, it's like it's a way of almost like looking in without having to dive into the source code of what does this thing take? What can I do with it?
Yeah, and that's a great point. And probably something to go back to is you can flip on and off those filters at ease. Like you don't have to delete the regex. But just as you said, if we wanted to go in here and see what's going on, we could do that real easily. So you can see.
Oh, yeah.
All right, so let me go ahead and turn that back off. Okay, cool. So that's the kind of the big, just the high level, how to just peek at what's happening. The far more interesting, a little more complicated part is the profiler. So I'm going to pull, this is Thoreau's Civil Disobedience, if you've ever had to read that essay in school or something. And it's pretty nice because it's about, I think it's about like 20 pages. Well, it's enough that it's going to slow things down, but not really kill the applications. Let's try it in this end.
This should get exciting.
Yeah. I love that this is your go-to.
So this is actually a funny thing from the article I wrote for DigitalOcean. This was in my the original draft. And they're like, we can't put that in there. I was like, are you kidding me? This is like an American classic, but no, I had to go put in something else. So I think the actual article uses a Wikipedia entry for open source or something like that. But I still think this works a little better. All right, so I'm going to try and add in some more text. And this kind of comes over weird in streaming because you can't see that I'm typing and there's a delay. So I'm just going to tell you, hitting an enter and I'm typing hello. Okay, I finished typing. You can see there's a long delay. And there it is. So that's kind of to be expected. We saw that function that goes through and itemizes things. But what's I think the profiler is better for is when things take a long time that you shouldn't. So for example, let's go ahead and turn off this characters count. I'm going to click on it, long delay, and it goes away. So it's not instantaneous. I'll just do that again. Maybe let's add a little bit more text in there just to make it really
feel the pain.
Yeah.
Because you're saying like you kind of expect the analysis to take a while because you know you have that expensive algorithm, but you don't expect the toggling of a simple thing on the screen to be intensive because it's kind of just changing the rendering of one thing, right?
Right. And they're not directly related. So
yeah,
that's where some profiling problems come up in my experience, is when you have unrelated changes causing changes elsewhere.
Yeah, if it's slow and it's supposed to be slow, that's one thing.
Right. Okay, this is a little better. So I click the character count. There's about a 1 second delay. And so this is where the profiler gets really interesting. So I'm going to click over to the profiler. And it's really simple. You get the component state to where you want it. You get the state of the application. Hit that little button there, and we'll click the character count. Wait for it to finish, and we click it off. Uh-oh, I think I had... No, this is fine. So you can kind of see that the app, the debug, they didn't render. And then it tells you which things took place. So the text information changed, didn't take that long. Character map took a lot of time. So that's kind of, to me, that would jump out because we toggle on the character count. What we're seeing is the character map. And so by default, it uses the flame graph, which is the structure of your application, the tree. You can also flip over to ranked, and it's really obvious. This one's causing some problems. So one of the things about the profiler that I didn't realize until I started poking around is it has this really nice option, which is turned off by default, which is that it will actually tell you why something changed. So you have to go, and I'm just going to do that again real fast. You go in the settings, and in the profiler, you can click this box that says record why each component rendered. And this is nice because you can kind of get some more information about, well, what the heck caused it to change. So I'm going to clear this, and we'll do that again real fast.
I wonder if it's off because if that process itself is expensive.
Yeah, I mean, that's my best guess. Okay, and so now you can see a little more information. So here the hook's changed. Again, that makes sense based off what we have. And then here, the parent component rendered. So that doesn't give us a ton of information, but it does give us something to start to think about. So we know that the parent component rendered, and by kind of default in React, the parent component changes, it re-renders the whole component tree. And so one of the things that we can do is we can start to be more intelligent about when we render components. Sorry, was someone going to say something? All right,
I think Dan's coffee mug, when it hits his desk, creates a reverberation.
Oh man, I've got 6 flat walls in here, and so I don't know how it could get any worse. Apparently, putting a coffee mug down is like an earth-shattering move. I agree with you; it's terrible. I wish I could do something about it. We'll take a donation from donors, from the millions who watch this stream. If they can all pitch in $1, I can get some soundproofing. Just $1 a month, folks, and you don't have to hear my coffee mug hit the table.
There you go. All right, I'm going to actually, before I show the fix, I'm going to try one more thing to see if we can see an example of how it's slightly different. So this time we're going to toggle the character map on and off and on. And we do that, and now you see there's actually a little bit more information here that's kind of interesting. So again, another good reason to get rid of some of that extra stuff is look how much space that app is taking. It's really making it kind of hard to dive in here. So let's go ahead and add app to the stuff we're filtering out. App and debug.
I never knew about this filter thing. It's really, really interesting.
Yeah, I think we had to, only downside of the profiler is it doesn't update dynamically. You just have to run through it again. There we go. There you go, a little easier to read. Okay, it didn't give us as much information as I thought. That's okay, we'll come back to it in the next one. Just kind of here. Oh, no, here we go. So you can see that here it's a little different because the change here is that the props changed. And you can see that it tells us exactly what prop changed. It was that show prop. So this is the only one that we care about. So while this stuff was happening, because the parent re-rendered. All right, and so one of the things that you can use, you may have used before, is the memo. What memo does is it will only re-render a component if one of the props change. So in that case, it would only re-render because the show re-rendered. So let me go ahead and update that. One thing that I didn't mention that I want to get across, it's really important as when you're doing this, is to always set a baseline. Set a baseline by seeing what happens first, then make a change, and then reprofile it. I think a lot of times when we profile or when we try to optimize things, we just kind of jump in and start doing crazy stuff. Just moving these things around because it's just faster. It's just faster. And if you don't actually test it, you can actually make things worse. There's this really good article, and I can't remember if I linked to an article I wrote. If not, I'll find it and I'll send it out. But they were talking about the pure component, which is kind of the precursor to the memo. And someone went through, I can't remember the guy's name, but he's the creator of React Router. He went through and he said, oh, obviously this is great. And he added it pure component to every single component in his entire application. And then he went through and he profiled it and actually made his application slower. And when you think about it, it makes sense because what happens with both memo and pure component is first it takes the props, then it does an equality check, and then it renders or doesn't render. So you added an extra step. So that's why it's so important to go back and try and make sure that you have the data. All right.
Is it Ryan Florence, Michael Jackson?
It was Ryan Florence.
Yeah. Ryan Florence, okay. Yeah, to see
there's
if I can find it.
in here for unintended consequences when we think something works without actually taking a look at it, because that's a smart person. They're very smart. They've done great things with React, and yet they unknowingly cause performance issues that'd be really hard to understand without a profiler.
Exactly. Yep.
And does the parent API need to change when you use memo, or is it just wrapping in memo is sufficient in and of itself?
Yep, that's sufficient. You can do some smart stuff if you want, where you can, I think that's a function that does, it takes the props, then you can check it. But out of the box, it just does a regular equality check. So it works for strings. It doesn't work so much for other things, which we'll actually get to in a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah, but so it's super simple. But again, don't do it unless you know you need it, because you could have that side effect. Let's just take a look now that we've added that in. We'll profile, turn off the character count, turn it back on. You can already see it's going faster. And what's cool here is you can see it didn't take that long, but also you can see that this is now memoized. If you look back at the components, you can also see this kind of little hint here that this is a memoized component. So you get a little bit of extra information. So you can see there's two different actions because there's two different clicks. If I were to type, you would see about one action per click. Sometimes there's a few more that you may or may not be able to figure out where they come from. But you can also kind of click around to see that. So this one, a lot faster. Cool. All right, let's go back up. And so that was essentially the slow one. Now we're going to look at this expensive calculation. All right, so this is pretty much the same as before. Got rid of some of those extra toggles. And one other thing that's different is I moved some of the actions into the component. So before, the parent component was deciding which components to render. Now we're going to pass either show or don't show the explanation as a prop. And if that prop is there, it shows it. Otherwise, it just renders it by itself. So now the character map is handling that. It's already memoized. Oh, don't look at that part at the bottom. Don't look behind the curtain. And that's what we'll get to in a sec. It's already memoized, so if the properties don't change, it won't re-render. But it's still going to give us a little bit of a problem. So I'm going to come back in here and grab some more stuff. Actually, I'll show you one other thing that's pretty neat that I found when I worked on this. So you may have used if you've ever done any profiling on Chrome and Firefox, I don't know about Safari, but at least from Chrome and Firefox, you can throttle the APIs so that you can kind of emulate being on a mobile or something like that. And that's super helpful. If you haven't done that, you definitely should try it because it really is revealing about a lot of things. But something that you can do on Chrome, unfortunately not on Firefox, is you can also throttle the CPU.
Oh, yeah.
So this is pretty nice because most of us developers have pretty beefy computers. And so everything looks fast, of course, and it's only when you ship it that you start to get information about things going slow. So this isn't a perfect tool, but it's pretty nice, and it can give you a little bit of a glimpse into what it's like for someone who may have a slower computer. So I'm just going to try this and see if it. Okay, so I hit enter and I hit some more keys. Sometimes it actually slows mine down so much that it's not worth it. It looks like down's going to be 1 out of 10. I'm just going to turn that off, but that's something to keep in your pocket. There you go, finally rendered. Something to keep in your pocket as another tool. All right, so I hit backscape. So that's moving nice and slow, just as we expected. Got the word hello. Everything's moving slow. Cool. Okay, going back in here. Same as before. Nothing new, nothing exciting. You can see that the show explanation is now a prop. And what we're going to do is we're going to toggle this, and we're going to see what happens. So toggle it, shows the explanation. Toggle again, a little bit of a delay. And you can see here that it changed this time, not because the parent changed because it's memwise, but because the show explanation prop changed. And it took about half a second, which is still, I would consider pretty long, and then half a second to come back.
Yeah.
Yep.
And that half a second, though, that's doing the actual computation, though, right?
Yep. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It doesn't dig down that deep into what it's doing. It can just kind of tell you the whole thing took this long before it's finished.
Yeah, and you wouldn't really want it to go any deeper because otherwise you're getting into like JavaScript, those like reduce and filter calls and.
Yeah. Cool, but that really does give us enough information that we can start to create a plan. So we know that show explanation. We don't want certain things. We only want when show explanation comes up to show the explanation or hide it. If the text hasn't changed, we don't actually want this to be recalculated. And so that's where that use memo comes in.
Right, like because you don't want it to slow down when someone's typing, essentially, right?
Exactly. And so what use memo does, and I think I actually did that wrong. Yep. This is why I always keep my cheating at the bottom. What use memo does is it reruns a function only when the information in the array changes. So if the show explanation changes, we don't want it to run. We already have the text. Nothing is changing with the text. The calculations are going to be the exact same. It's not worth it. So let's add that in there. And now the theory is that if we toggle on and off show explanation, it will be a little faster. All right, so let's clear that out. Start that. Hit the show explanation. Turn it off. You can see already it's going faster.
Yeah.
1.1 milliseconds. Again, it doesn't really tell you why it got faster, but you do have some pretty clear evidence that worked. And of course, if we were to profile it, but make a change to the text. Hello world. Wait a sec to finish. And stop it. It's going to take a long time, but this time that's because the props of the text changed. And this one's nice. I'm pointing at my screen, but you guys cannot see me pointing. It shows also that the hooks changed. This actually did give us a little more information. The hooks in this case being the use memo changed. So it didn't tell which hook changed, but it says a hook reran inside of this specific component. So that's a little bit of a clue. And again, you can use this information if you think you have a certain hook that shouldn't be running and you're seeing in here, well, wait, it is running, then that can give you a clue that maybe there's something in the array of dependencies that you didn't expect, or whatever. Or if you're like me and you forget to put that in there about every third time, it's because there is no array and it just keeps running.
Could you make this even smarter and say, like, if the explanation, I guess you might have to refactor your code, but say if the explanation isn't showing, then don't keep running that algorithm either, like the character algorithm. Like, you might need to refactor at that point, but if I'm showing the character breakdown, then sure, go ahead and update it. But if I'm not,
Oh yeah, and you could do that. Although in this case, the character breakdown is always there. What comes and goes is this extra little.
Oh yeah, okay.
Think of it like a tooltip or something like that. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Cool. All right, so let's go on to another one. And here's the thing: is that there's not a lot of. The thing about profiling is there's not a lot of tools. It's really about using the tool you have and then using it over and over. Optimization and profiling is a grueling process because, here we're making this massive gain of something going from 500 milliseconds to 1 millisecond. In reality, when I've been involved in profiling and optimizing, it's more like you're gaining 10 milliseconds here, 50 milliseconds there, and it can get pretty brutal. There's almost never like a one
huge win.
Yeah, exactly. At least for reasons.
Well, even if there isn't too, I think the other thing is it's one of those things you have to learn to use really well too. Because to your point earlier, when this gets used, when you're at an at-scale React app, like part of your challenge is just navigating around and finding, like isolating things is kind of your hardest task. So that's why I think like some of the things around filtering, especially like you could really be aggressive with those filters if you have like a specific thing in mind that you're doing, because lots of times you could have an absolute ton of crap on the screen and it's just going to get in the way and mess with what you want to isolate and focus on.
Yeah. Besides, occasionally you do get a big win. I remember I did some consulting for a company that sold educational materials, and they had this order form page, and the whole site would crash about 10 o'clock every day and stay crashed until about 4. And given that their education and teachers were their market, kind of a big problem. And so, fast forward blood, pain, agony, and sweat and tears. And what it turned out to be is some developer was using an ORM but didn't understand how they worked. And say they were running like 900 plus queries on the order form page. And each query had a baked in delay of about 10 milliseconds of latency. So every time it's going back and forth to the database, it's 10 milliseconds, which 1-2 queries, not a big deal. 900 queries, it's 10 seconds. Get a bunch of people pounding the page, and now you've created your own distributed denial of service attack on your database. You can't sell any products. Number one page we wanted to work was the order form, because without that, no money. And so that was kind of an unbelievable series of events. And it was kind of a big bang. And all we did was convert that into like 3 queries instead of 900 and something. And hey, guess what? We started making more money. I got to ride that bit of success for a couple of weeks there until I had to come up with the next bit of magic.
Yeah.
Do you have a banner on your wall, Dan, like to commemorate?
I remember it being hilarious, though. And I don't want to take up too much time on this, but what was interesting is the developer who wrote this would not believe that this was the problem. And what he kept saying is, well, it works on my machine. And I'm like, dude, you have like 10 records in your database. Like, of course it does, And he actually got let go over this whole situation because he just wouldn't adapt. And, we didn't have a great profiling tool like this that was available to everyone and you could sort of trust the results. I have a feeling, fast forward 10 years, if we had something more like this, it'd have been easier to get to a common understanding of the problem and the types of things that caused it, and we could have avoided it more in the future.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And ego is always the biggest enemy, for sure. When you're debugging or just doing any sort of coding.
Yeah, this gets into like my best debugging story I have. I worked for an insurance company, and we had a problem where occasionally users' sessions would just get corrupted and get values in places that they shouldn't be. And it happened extremely randomly, but we knew it was a thing. And turns out, like after forever, we figured out that somebody was using a static value and like a Java class to store state. And it should have been like instance, like specific to that user, but instead they were storing it in kind of like a global place, which was only a problem if like 2 people happened, like if that value switched before it was used on like a couple lines of code below. So really the only time it'd be a problem is if like 2 people hit the same Java class at like identical times so that it like changed in between these things processing.
Right.
But like tracking that thing down, because like you couldn't get it to happen in a development environment at all, because you needed multiple different people to hit the thing at the same time.
Yeah.
And like, we did have an actual like party to celebrate finding that, because that was just
Yeah.
awful. But like, that's why like, but like knowing the tools, like it can help you at least to have what you need to try to track these things down.
Yeah. Well, now I have to give my best story, which is I was early in my career and I worked at a company. We made a lot of individual websites and they were all on different small AWS instances. And we had a ping alert set up. So whenever one day went down, I would get a ping on my phone. And there was a situation where they started going off just randomly. And, you know, I'd be woken up at 2 a.m. Sometimes they go off at 6 p.m., sometimes in the middle of the day. And it just made no sense because it wasn't during the software update. It wasn't during high load periods. And so, you know, I had no way of figuring out what was going on. The log records were pretty empty. So I pretty much just finally resorted to keeping a list on my desk with the names of all the instances. There's about 100. And then whenever one would go down, I'd write when it was. And the only pattern I could find was there was about a 3-day cycle before they would do that again. And so turns out there's some memory leak somewhere. And essentially what was happening was it would restart this process. And then every time it restarted, it would like just have just the tiny amount of memory leakage. And so it slowly like just eked up until it crashed the whole thing. And I can't remember what the solution was. I think there was at least 2 solutions. So it was not a big win, but like 2 medium wins, I guess, that we ended up using.
It's another one, like, I don't know how you debug that, right? Like in your case, it was a piece of paper. Like,
yeah. Right. I mean, I used to have just like HTOP sitting open on my desk, you know, with a random server. I would just have one at random just so I could see it throughout the day. I could look over at any point. And that's kind of where I noticed, I'm like, wait, at 10 a.m. it was kind of here. And now I'm sure if I was smarter, if I was a better infrastructure engineer, I bet there's other tools I could use, which again, going back to what I said at the beginning, is why I think it's so important whenever you're starting something new, figure out what the debugging tools are, because you can save yourself a world of hurt.
Yeah,
Totally. I mean, how many console.log statements would you need to figure that out?
Yeah, exactly. Well, here's like the one I always tell is when I first started programming, I'm self-taught, and I learned from books. And so I had a book, and it was a PHP book. And so I'd look at the book, it would have the code, I'd type the code into a text editor, and I didn't know anything about debugging. And so pretty much I would hit save, and either the application would show up on the browser or it wouldn't. Like, that's it. And so I spent so much time, I would hold my book right next to the screen and look line by line. It wasn't until I was about 3 months in that I finally figured out that you could go into the PHP settings and tell it to turn on debugging, and they will say, oh, you're missing a semicolon at line 30. And so it's a hard lesson learned, but I learned after that, like, always figure out how to turn on the That was brutal. All right, I'll show one more. And this is going to be very similar to the last one. So same thing, but here the difference is that the itemize takes a transformation function right here. So we have this memoize, and now if either the text or the transformer changes, we're going to pass that in. In this case, the transformer is just going to do the same thing. It's going to put that into lowercase, but you know, maybe another person would want to capitalize it or something else, strip out different characters. All right, so we have this in here, and same thing. We're going to start this profiling. We're going to toggle the show explanation, toggle back off. And you can see again it's taking a long time. Now here, this one is actually a lot more helpful because it shows us that the props, in this case, the props have changed, the show explanation changed, but also the transformer changed. So that immediately, to me, would kind of jump out. I'm like, well, hold on, why did the transformer change? All I did was click the button. Well, so as I was saying earlier about Memo, what Memo does is it does a shallow comparison. So it doesn't actually compare things like objects or functions. And so what you need to do is you need to set those up in such a way that they don't change across rendering. And the way you do that is with this nice tool called Use Callback. Use Callback is very similar to Use Memo, except for you it passes a function and it returns a function. In this case, we are passing the function to lowercase. We don't want this to ever change, so we're going to keep the array blank here. So now this will be referentially identical. And so it will always refer to the same function. So when you do a strict comparison, it will say it's the same. So let me just go ahead and save that. I don't know why it erased my words, but that's okay. Just paste it back in. Okay, so clear it out. Run that, hit the show explanation. Going off faster. Stop profiling. Didn't change. That's kind of interesting. I wonder if I have interesting. Oh, here we go. For some reason, it kind of cut off my other stuff, but that's where the ranked comes in. So we can look at the ranked, and we can see that the props changed in this case was the show explanation. Yeah,
that was a little weird.
So let's see. One other thing that's kind of nice to look at is let's do a slightly longer action. So we have this going a lot faster. So now sometimes when you're profiling, you have to do like one or two things. Maybe you click something and it will trigger something else to change, so trigger something else to change. So I'm going to emulate that by typing and then clicking the button. So I'll start the profiling, type hello. It's going to take a while. It's going to show up hopefully, and then show explanation. Turn that off. So you see you have all these different, as I mentioned before, each of these are different answers. So each of these are pretty much a keystroke. And then you have these smaller ones here, which are the toggling. So again, this is a small application, so you only have 9 kind of changes. In big applications that do a lot of complicated rendering and re-rendering, that like maybe you have a table that's sorting and different things like that, these can get pretty high even if you only do one specific action. So one thing that's nice is you can kind of, back to the point of cutting out the noise, you can hide anything that takes shorter than a certain amount of time. So in this case, I'm going to hide anything below 5 milliseconds. And you can see this one actually does work dynamically. It can cut out some of those little ones there. And so that can help you kind of start to pinpoint like what are the big problems. This one's not as straightforward as filtering out components, as in you'll probably want to turn it off and on, because in general, they may intersperse. And so you'll probably want to know why. That's a good way to start to clean things up. If you know that, if you have a bunch of items that are small, but then a couple that are big, hide the ones that are kind of small, focus on the ones that are big, and then back out from there and start to put the puzzle back together.
Yeah, I mean, 1,010 millisecond calls adds up pretty quick, but you're not going to take a lot of meat out of that. Like a call that takes a second, you could probably get 10% out of that pretty easy.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Cool. All right, so that's pretty much all I got demo-wise.
I think this is phenomenal. I mean, your example is great, and it's very simple, but it definitely shows the issue. And you've walked us through like what to do on the React side and how to make the most use of these tools. I don't think anybody has an excuse not to start digging in.
Yeah, and the dev tools are done. Facebook itself manages these and created these, right?
Yeah, I believe so. I think they're officially supported.
Yeah, I'm also curious, like, how much, like, if there's anybody actively working on this, or are there like new features in development? Because I have to say I haven't heard much about the dev tools in a while.
Me neither. And I wrote the article about this probably 6 or 7 months ago, and not a thing has changed that I can tell since then. Just do a quick Google search.
Yeah, it's funny because, like, in a sense, like, that's not necessarily a horrible thing, because they kind of do what they do quite well. So I'm not even necessarily sure what I would want them to do per se. I just sort of find it interesting.
Yeah. I mean, it looks like they released an update not too long ago. So something's changing.
Last week.
May just be too subtle for me to have noticed. But
yeah, it may just have been they changed the date on updated.
Yeah, there you go.
We had a guest on last year that there was a group that had built this tool called Realize. Have you heard of that before?
No, I haven't.
It's pretty interesting. It was like a browser extension that you could visualize the React state flow and the component hierarchy, and it actually worked with the development tools.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, I threw it in the chat. It's funny too, Dan. When you brought that up, I thought like in terms of things I would like to see, they had some pretty interesting ideas of how like state and props flow, and definitely some stuff that would be interesting to sort of make more official in some sense.
Yeah, I mean, there's an old pithy saying that, you can't solve a problem with the same thinking that got you into it. And I feel like if you type your way into a problem, if you can extract your context out of that and get into a tool like this, it helps you get out of that mindset that you just can't see the problem you created. And plus, like, this profile is empirical. Yes, your code is slow. Go fix it. Here's the exact problem. There's no opinions there. Like, it's what it is. Every 16 milliseconds, that's a frame. How many do you want to drop?
Yep.
And Nitwick's in the chat. Hey, he said, nice demo, Joe. Thank you. So you've got some fans in the chat. Thanks for joining us, Nitwicks. Please
buy Joe's merch.
Right.
If anybody has any debugging related questions too, feel free to drop those as well. While we're waiting, Joe, I know there was something else that you said if we had time you wanted to show. Do you want to run through that real quick? We've got a little time here, and if people have questions while you're bringing that up, feel free to drop them in chat as well.
Sure. Yeah. So one article that I have kind of in progress. I've been doing a lot of work with micro front ends, and so I have a nice kind of hello world example of micro front ends. Uses a lot of React. It's going to be in Smashing Magazine. I don't know when, probably a month or two. So keep your eyes.
It's a great magazine too.
Yeah. So,
heard it here first, though.
That's right.
This is an exclusive feed. So check that out, because I think micro front ends are pretty awesome. I've used them at a couple of places, and they're a great way to kind of, especially if you're refactoring an old application. But the one thing I want to show you is one of the key tools are what are called import maps, which are what an import map is an import map is a way to kind of break out of a lot of the build tools. So, you probably use Webpack or Rollup, and essentially what those do is those handle all the import X from Y, and then it bundles it all together and it spits it out in one nice little code block. Well, there's a proposal that's been accepted, and it's called import maps. And what it is something like this. You list what you're importing and then where it should be found. So in this case, we want to import Lodash capitalize, and we're going to get it from unpackage.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what happens is in your React code, sorry, your JavaScript code, no React here, unfortunately, in your JavaScript code, when you say import, it will look up to the import map and get it there. So in this case, let me just show you the code we have. I'm importing capitalize, and then I'm doing some just basic vanilla JavaScript stuff here. And then it's going to do that. So this code is not bundled in any way. All I'm doing is I'm serving up the code directly. So let me just show you. If you look at it, it's pulling it up exactly as you see it. But the browser knows that when it hits that import statement to check it against the import map. And this is pretty neat, because this is kind of the first step to moving away from build tools as a mandatory step. Not that build tools are bad. I like build tools. But you can start to move away from it as a mandatory step. And what's really interesting about this is that you can really get lazy loading without having to be too smart about it. I'll put it that way. Because it will load it up only when it needs it. And so let me show you.
Yeah, because whenever I tried to do like lazy loading in complex apps, it's like, well, if you want to do lazy loading and get a lot of value out of it, you have to start to like break up your dependencies, and then like it gets really weird in terms of what needs what and what comes in what bundle to optimize what gets, and it gets to be a mess.
Yeah.
So it looks like what you did is you defined a sort of a namespace and then a resource.
Mm-hmm.
And then you reference that namespace in your page, let's say, and then the browser sort of detects that namespace you said and said, do I already have this asset? If not, fetch it. And if I do, here it is, basically, kind of thing.
Exactly.
And so the theory is for subsequent page loads, I won't need to pay this tax.
Exactly. Yep.
But doesn't it do that kind of already based off of the path? At least the JavaScript file?
guess I'm not sure what you're asking, but
Me
maybe.
either.
Well, if you're saying like,
Describe
Dan,
to me why this is awesome.
if you go to like / about us, right? Like the reason the browser already has it is because most apps probably aren't lazy loading, so they're like the users already downloaded everything
Right.
they sort of need for it.
Mhm.
But say like about us is like needs 500K of JavaScript because about us is doing all sorts of fancy dynamic stuff. Well, then you don't want the browser to download that stuff until it needs it.
Mhm.
But then the how you do that becomes the challenge that currently like people are mostly using some sort of crazy Webpack stuff to do,
Mhm.
which can work, but it's also a mess. So this is kind of an interesting idea, an interesting approach.
Yep. And you can see that kind of like it kind of feeds on itself. So here's hello, it keeps popping up, and that triggers a load of capitalize. Well, capitalize and Lodash has another requirement, which it then loads up, which has another requirement that it then loads up. So it's kind of lazy loading all the way down. We don't have to know ahead of time that we need this. The modules just kind of keep going. So pretty neat opportunity. And then, so in the article that's coming out, I talk about this, but then I talk about some tools that you can use that emulate this called System.js, pretty popular format for bundling things that do a lot of the same things. But
yeah, we had crap. I feel bad now. I'm a snowpack guy, Dan. Help me with the name. Fred shot on from Snowpack to show us off, and kind of a similar approach. Like, because one thing Snowpack can now do is like you can like pick a spot where your package is, and it'll dynamically get it from like the web. So it's almost kind of like a way of not only moving away from like bundlers, but even from like npm itself in a sense, right? Because it's like you could almost envision like if you like go with like a utopian worldview, there's like some CDN that we're all getting our packages off on the web that like people would have cached sort of thing.
I think that's called Skynet.
Yeah. Well, I mean, honestly, that's what Unpackage is. Unpackage is a CDN that, and for those who aren't familiar, Unpackage is a CDN that has every node module. I think that's probably not exactly true, but almost every node module. Going back to Michael Jackson, he was the one who created this. And so it doesn't get away from NPM necessarily, because what it does kind of under the hood is it pulls them from NPM.
Yeah, relies, yeah.
But it's still like, you don't, it's out there. You're hitting a CDN rather than having to store it on your own servers, for good or bad. But
yeah, it's Unpackage's dependency though instead of yours in this case.
Yep.
Yeah, they control it. There was a CDN that Fred had called Skypack as well. And I found that kind of interesting because it's a free CDN. And I'm like, really? Like we used to pay, I don't even want to disclose how much money for Akamai, which is a not free CDN. By the way, Akamai, feel free to sponsor the show or sponsor some soundproofing if you like. We'll take t-shirts even, anything. Jolly Ranchers, what do you got?
Cool.
It's cool stuff.
So that's something I'm really excited about. That I haven't seen a lot of buzz about it, except for in certain specialized corners. I just want to give it some more volume because I think it's pretty neat.
No, I think you have a good topic, and I think so. I haven't heard much about this import style, so I'm definitely going to check it out. But I have seen a sense of like there's a trend of people getting upset of like I feel like we've had like a long time now where Webpack was like the tool that you just use. Like if you're building a front end app in general, like Webpack is just something you use. And nowadays it seems like it's being attacked from multiple angles. Like people are coming up with like faster tools or more specialized tools or like replicating part of what it does. So I don't know. I think like the bundling, however we do bundling, is going to change drastically over the next couple of years, just because there's a lot of activity around that.
There is
for sure.
A lot of smart people doing smart things, and at some point the browser tries to commoditize it all.
Yeah, for me, it's just like I think we're still a little ways away from before it changes for your average developer, because I think we're in the phase now where like smart people are building tools, like writing articles like you are, and like we need like the best ideas to sort of win right now, because right now there's like a lot of just competition for what is the path forward for that sort of stuff.
Yeah, and I know you mentioned Snowpack, and that's definitely a good one. I agree, because they, it's great too, because even if you never use a tool, getting someone else's take on how to use something new, like for example, they make liberal use of this type equals module, which is really interesting. That's part of the reason it's so fast, is because they break it out into things that are going to change and things that aren't going to change, and they have them in different script types. I never would have thought about that until I started seeing it, and then as I started digging around, I realized, well, that could work pretty well with this import map that I was thing I was seeing, and then started putting them together. So
what's browser support for import map is? Because I assume that's just a native browser thing, since it's actually type equals import map.
Yeah, sorry, what was the question?
What is browser support like? Is it a Chrome only thing right now?
Yeah, it's only Chrome. Well, it's I'm blanking on what's the Chrome engine called again?
No, that's the JavaScript engine.
Well, anyway, it's the
Blink,
whatever the Chrome engine is, which also powers Edge. So it's in.
Isn't it Blink?
Maybe, I don't know.
Oh man,
I'm
okay.
so
Hold on a
clueless.
second.
We gotta figure this out.
Yeah,
I thought I would know. Like if I was on Jeopardy, I'd have went daily double on this one, but apparently I'd have lost all my cash.
Yeah. No, it's Blink. Blink powers Chromium. Yeah.
Anyway,
Anyone
that uses that will have it. So it's an Edge in Chrome, but not Firefox or Safari. And I haven't seen any roadmaps or anything for those two. So it's going to be a while.
Yeah.
Yeah, when I got into this business, we had to write for 3 browsers and 2 of them were IE. And so it's sad to see that come back again. There was like this brief moment where everything converged, and now it seems like it's diverging again.
Yeah,
it's all right. Like I think overall though, compared to then, like even though Chrome gets most of the stuff first, like it also becomes a place where ideas can be tested as well, like because we wouldn't want only Chrome, because then any idea that came out of Google would just wildly appear, good or bad.
True.
Well, cool. And hey Netflix, thanks. Yeah, I didn't know about import maps either, so thanks for the info, Max. Thanks for sharing. I'll be back next week. So yeah, we do this every week, so come hang out. It was cool having you. Well, Joe, this was really awesome. One thing we'd like to end with is just any like pics or links you have. So if people want to follow you, if they want to be the first to see your smashing article, where's the best place for that? Or are there any other links you want to drop here that we can share?
Yeah, Twitter name's right there by my name. I don't tweet a lot, but I usually tweet out the stuff that I'm working on. So that'd probably be the best place to get the bleeding edge. And I think that's about it. Kind of quiet for me these days, actually, which is nice.
Yeah, I'll also drop the article that you wrote for DigitalOcean on debugging as well. That some of your demo was based off today. So if people want to get the reading version of that, they have it.
Great. Yeah, appreciate it.
Well, cool. Dan, is anything you want to drop here?
Yeah, I'll mention the Enterprise React newsletter once again. The fine folks at Digital Primates work really hard on making sure that all the content is developer focused, and that's how we found out about Joe. So give it a subscribe. They'll never sell your email.
Cool. And I will drop another link to the React Wednesdays homepage in the chat as well, just to remind people that you can always add things to your calendar if you see stuff that's interesting there, and that we do this every week if you want to come hang out. If you're watching this on YouTube right now, come join us live. It's kind of fun. Get to ask questions, hang out. So, well, cool. Joe, thanks again, man. This was awesome. Really appreciate you taking the time to teach us some stuff today.
Yeah, big pleasure.
Cool. Thanks.
All right. Until next week, everybody.